Hello, welcome to episode 5 of Hot Routes. Matthew Coller here, Jonathan Harrison as always, and joining the fray for this episode, Paul Hodowanic, who is a Purple Insider contributor, also works for WCCO Radio and writes for the Associated Press and sometimes even does baseball for MLB.com. What is going on, Paul? Glad to have you on Hot Routes. This version, you did a YouTube version. You've done the Purple Insider version a bunch of times, but now you are here on the new platform. What is up, my friend?
Yeah, I feel like I'm a Hot Routes veteran, although this is only my first appearance on the show. But yes, I'm in full football mode. Baseball, especially in the Twin Cities, is now winding down. Not much Twins to cover. No postseason baseball to cover for them this year. So we're fully in NFL mode, and I'm excited to talk some Hot Routes today.
Okay, so they didn't get the 1 round or 3 games of playoffs then this year. You hate to see it.
No, they didn't.
But real quick story before we get into our 5 questions that I have prepared is when COVID hit, my sports radio station shut down and Paul lost an internship. And so you reached out to me and said, hey, can I help you out with building Purple Insider? And the first thing that we did for you to get on the air with the podcast was Hot Routes, because I thought it was a good way to dip your feet in to where you could ask the questions. And eventually then you started answering the questions. And now I'm very proud to see you working in radio as a broadcaster and as a writer. So great stuff. It's kind of coming full circle here with Hot Routes. But let's we'll say hi to Jonathan too. Hi, Jonathan. Hey, Jonathan, hey guys. Real quick. Are you back? Like, you went to London for the Vikings game. How does your body feel?
Feels pretty well. I mean, most of my flights yesterday were during the day, so I did a good job of planning to stay awake for most of it. It was weird, though, starting Sunday off in London, watching the football game, then taking a train back up to Manchester, hopping on the airplane at 6 a.m. Manchester time, and there was still football going on as I was boarding the plane to get back to America. It was the trippiest thing, one of the trippiest experiences in my life, but it was awesome.
Yeah, I wonder about how that will impact the Vikings as they play the Bears this week, all the crazy travelness that they've had to go through, but it's also the Bears. So who knows? But let's dive right into it. There's, and this connects to the Bears, there's a boatload of 2-2 teams in the NFL. I mean, there's a whole division where everyone is 2-2. Here's what I want from you guys. Give me the teams that you are confident in, maybe 1 or 2, that are real contenders who are 2-2, and it's just been a bit of an up and down start. And the teams that are 2-2, but you are sure that they are not good. So we'll let Paul kick it off here.
All right. Teams that are really good that are 2-2. I think the Ravens have to be on the top of all of these lists. I think could very easily be sitting here at 4-0, but they've kind of allowed 2 comebacks to the Dolphins and the Bills. Some crazy comebacks to allow them to be at this point where they're 2-2 and tied with the division with the Bengals and the Steelers, I believe, or no, the Bengals and the Browns. Those are the 2-2 teams. There's 13 2-2 teams. There's so many to keep track of. But yeah, I think the Ravens, just because when you have Lamar Jackson as your quarterback, your ceiling just gets raised by that alone. They're third, I believe, in points scored this season. They're top 5 in expected points added on offense. To be honest, their 2 losses are to the Bills and the Dolphins when they had Tua and they were world beaters. Like, I don't think all losses are not necessarily created equal in terms of how we view this throughout the rest of the season. And when you're losing to those 2 teams, I think you're going to be all right. I think J.K. Dobbins is back. That's going to help unlock the run game a little bit more. I don't think the passing game is going to get worse as Rashad Bateman continues to develop and Lamar Jackson continues to kind of get more experience with Devin Duvernay and some of the other weapons there. Like, I think it will only continue to improve unless some big injuries happen, but I'm confident in the coaching staff. I'm confident in Lamar Jackson. And I think they're clearly the best team in that division for me still at 2-2. And no one else has gone up to be 4-0 or 3-1. Like, they're not fighting now from behind. They're still tied for the division lead. So in terms of contenders, they're right at the top of the list. And then I'll give an NFC one as well. And that's the Buccaneers. For very similar reasons. Their 2 losses, Chiefs and Packers, not exactly bad losses there. They've been really, really banged up. Some of those banged up pieces aren't going to come back, like along the offensive line. They're just going to have to deal with some of the deficiencies that they have. But they missed Mike Evans for that Green Bay game, and the offense looked really bad. He's now back. He had a great game against the Chiefs, even though they lost. Chris Godwin is continuing to get back healthy Who knows what they'll get out of Julio, but you only assume that wide receiver core is going to get healthier and healthier. And I think that team is probably just going to get better and better. I think the defense didn't look good against the Chiefs, but I think that can happen to a lot of teams against the Chiefs. I'm still confident in this team, and that division is not great either. I mean, you have some teams that are 2-2, like the Falcons, but I'm going to go ahead and say the Bucs and the Falcons aren't battling for the division here in a few months. Similarly with the Saints, and I think the Panthers are probably one of the worst teams that the NFL has to offer. So I think when you combine the fact that their 2 losses have been against pretty decent teams, their division is weak, and you still have Tom Brady, even if he has just a slightly taken a step back from an MVP caliber season last year. I think just with the schedule around him and the pieces around him bound to get a little healthier, those 2 teams feel like easy contenders. Now, pretenders, there's a long list. I mean, I'm not going to pile on the Jets right now. I'm just happy that they're 2-2 at this point, but I don't think that's a team that you're looking for to make noise down the stretch. Similarly, the Bears are 2-2. Happy that you got 2 wins, Bears, but I'm not sure that's going to sustain. If I might just give one that I was kind of on the edge of contenders and pretenders, but I decided to make them a pretender, is the Browns. I think coming into the year, you just hope they survived through the Deshaun Watson period if you're a Browns fan. So far, they've done that. They're 2-2. But if you look at the teams they beat, I mean, they beat the god-awful Panthers in week 1, then lost to the Jets in embarrassing fashion week 2, beat the Steelers in week 3, a pretty convincing win from them Thursday night. And then they lose to the Falcons. So that's where they've been able to tread water. Now, this is their schedule coming up. Chargers, Patriots, Ravens, Bengals, Dolphins, Bills, and Bucs. So those are the teams that they have to face before Deshaun Watson comes back. So yes, they're 2-2. If they could maintain a 500 record until Deshaun Watson gets back, then maybe you can put them in the contenders division. But I think they can reasonably come out of that stretch at 3-8. I think the only team that you'd expect them to beat or be favored in heading into the week is this Patriots game in 2 weeks, especially if Mac Jones is hurt. Otherwise, it's Justin Herbert, it's Josh Allen, it's Tom Brady, it's Joe Burrow, it's Lamar Jackson. Like none of those teams feel like ones that the Browns should beat. So I don't think they are going to stay afloat. And, that doesn't bring me any pleasure to say that the Browns and Deshaun Watson will not be in contention this year. Just kidding. But I think they're one where through 4 weeks, maybe you're thinking 2-2, they can keep this up. But I think it's a little bit of a facade of who they faced. And I think once some of the tougher teams, they're going to drop. So even though they're still in that AFC North wide open currently, I think they are bound to fall down pretty drastically.
Can I just quickly say that when Jonathan and I were on the air together, we used to have a thing called Turbo Snark, where I would just really ramp it up. Paul has snark. Paul is the bicyclist of snark. If I'm the Fast and Furious, put the gas pedal all the way down, Paul is the cruise right by you and dagger you right in the side and then just keep riding on his wonderful little day.
He's the Minnesota Merge of the snark.
Yeah, that's right. What do you got, Jonathan? 2-2 teams.
Plenty. Yeah, as Paul said, plenty of 2-2 teams to choose from here. I'll start with pretenders. Broncos, starting off with the Turbo Snark. 2 words: Nathaniel Hackett. No way are they a contender with him as their head coach. I don't trust him with what they've done there. And Russell Wilson, it doesn't seem like it's all there anymore. The receivers aren't that great for him this year. And going to contenders, plenty to choose from. Chargers, this feels shaky, but I'll still trust the talent and Justin Herbert there, that they can get it together despite the really tough division. Bengals, I have them as a contender because it's Joe Burrow. He's too good. From what we saw last year, he's too good, and he has too many weapons on that offense for it not to stay together or come back to what they were last season. And then Jaguars, who else is going to come out of the AFC South? I mean, someone's got to. I don't think the Titans are going to be. I think they're in the pretender column because I think everything there seems like a year past its expiration date. Derrick Henry's just not the same guy anymore. Ryan Tannehill's not the same guy anymore. I think everything's just kind of 1 year too long in it's just too cooked there at that point. So I think it's the Jaguars as the contender from that division.
Can I add one thing, Matt? Because the 538 playoff projections are already up. They're going, and they give the Titans a better chance to win the division and make the playoffs than the Jags. What do we think of that? Because that stood out to me as I was just kind of going through trying to fact check some of my thoughts, and the Titans kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. Still over a 50% chance to make the playoffs, they say, even though they're 2-2 and not looking great.
The Titans kind of remind me a little bit, with Mike Vrabel as their coach, of the Steelers, when the Steelers would grind through bad Ben Roethlisberger seasons and somehow make the playoffs. Like, there shouldn't be enough there, but maybe there is. The Jaguars, to me, are an exciting team. And they lost to the Eagles, but the Eagles are really good. And, I think that they also lost 4 fumbles. Like, that's a random thing. You can fumble 4 times. If you fumbled 4 times in 100 straight games, you would not lose all 4 in any of those games, maybe like 1 or 2 times. So, I think that there's some randomness there, but I think that they're a better overall team, and they are coached well now with Doug Peterson. And I'm still very much buying what Trevor Lawrence is going to be long-term. I think they just lost the game to a really, really darn good team. And I would pick the Jaguars long-term for that as well. Now, a few of them that were left on the table, I am buying the San Francisco 49ers. I'm big buying the San Francisco 49ers. I think that division is a problem in a bad way. Like, I'm not buying Geno Smith long-term, though I love the story. Don't get me wrong. Arizona just got some problems. The Rams are not, they're on my other list. The Rams are the pretender list that I think, talk about cooked. Matt Stafford just looks like he is broken after last year, and they have no one to throw to. And I was always assuming that, other than Cooper Kupp, that Odell Beckham would be coming back, and now he's visiting other teams. I don't think it's a good situation. And the biggest thing is that Rams offense entirely rests on their offensive line. We saw that with Jared Goff, and we saw that with Matthew Stafford last year. They were number 1 in PFF pass blocking, and they were great. They are not that now. It's not just Andrew Whitworth. Like, they're not a good offensive line. And San Francisco beat their faces in last night. I think San Francisco is a good team. Jimmy Garoppolo will get the ball to the weapons. Kittle is great. Samuel is great. Ayuk is legit. Like, their defense is absolutely phenomenal. That team, I think, is a legitimate contender in the NFC. And I think the Rams are the exact opposite. I think the Cardinals are the exact opposite. And as much as I hope that Geno Smith has one of those magical journeyman years, I think as soon as it slips a little, Seattle is not a good team. So that's the whole division of teams that are 2-2. The Bears and the Falcons are kind of obvious ones that neither one of those teams have a
Cardinals?
great case. What's that?
How do you feel about the Cardinals?
Yeah, I think that the Cardinals have a lot of problems that maybe DeAndre Hopkins fixes, but I don't think that he does. The Cardinals, to me, are actually neither. They're not a contender, but they're not like complete garbage because they have Kyler Murray and he can still run around and make plays. I think they are an exact 8 or 9 win team. So they are what they are, which we really didn't talk about as a potential category for this, are what they are. But that, to me, is the Arizona Cardinals, that they're going to end up just in the middle. I think the Broncos are the same way, that they're not going to be so horrendous that they end up like 4-13, but it's just going to be 1 week they win and kind of get away with it. The next week they lose and they end up being mediocre when their expectations were much, much higher. The team that you guys didn't talk about a ton was the Bengals, and I am big buying the Bengals as well. They have a plus 21 point differential so far in their 2-2 start. They lost because they missed the field goal. Wait, is it both losses because they missed field goals? I mean, I think that Joe Burrow is one of the elite quarterbacks in the league. Their offensive line will improve as they improve their chemistry. Their defense is still good, that they're going to win that division. And maybe even, well, them and the Ravens are going to be neck and neck. That's kind of how I see that playing out. I think that when a team loses a game early on or a couple of games early on, that's really good. We all go like, oh, are they falling off from last year? I don't think that's the case. I think the Bengals actually got better overall as a team, and that will bear out over the full season. So, okay, great answers, guys. Great answers. We had a lot to get to with all of the 2-2 teams there. Next question. Let's play a little game here of It's Over, Man. Okay, where I'm going to say a QB and you guys tell me if it's over, man. All right. So I'll say one, then both of you answer kind of rapid fire. Then I'll say another one. Both of you answer. Okay. So we'll do it that way. So let's start out with Tom Brady. Is it over, man? We'll go Paul, then Jonathan.
It is not over, man. I think that I mentioned them in the contenders spot. I think it may be declining, man, but I don't think it's over. I think generally they still have enough weapons. I think this team has enough time, and they're going to have kind of the ability to figure it out just because that division isn't very good. And I think Tom Brady can still throw the ball where he needs to and do what he needs to do. I think the offensive line is going to inhibit him some. But I think we saw in that Chiefs game, the offense wasn't necessarily the problem there. So I think they can still, up against the best of them, compete and play really, really well on offense. I don't think Brady has reached some of the levels of it's over that we're going to get to in this category. And I think until he's retired, I'm not sure it's going to be over.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's over. I think, as Paul said, it's declining. Some of those numbers you look at, they're dropping a little bit from year to year, but you kind of expect that for a guy who's 45 years old, been playing in the NFL for 22 years, but he's still got the weapons on offense to do everything. He's the fifth best. He has the fifth best passing grade according to PFF. So I don't think it's over. There's plenty of other things on that team, including mainly that offensive line, that are the problems there.
Right. The weapons just have to get and stay healthy.
Yeah.
But I thought what was lost the other night in Patrick Mahomes' marvelous performance was that Brady actually played great. Their defense could not stop Kansas City, as I don't know that anyone's defense is stopping Kansas City this year, but Brady was very accurate in that game and actually had some drops that were really good throws. I think he'll get better as the season goes along. I'm not going to call him washed. As far as is it over, man? Baker Mayfield. Jonathan, you go first.
I couldn't place this in either category, whether it's over or if he still got it. I want to go jury's out. I don't know if that's an option because this
not
year,
an option. No,
well,
that's not how this works. It's not how any of this works.
Well, then I don't think he's still got it. So I guess I'll lean towards it's over, but it's only over because the Matt Rule effect is in play for this season. The injury effect was in play for last season. I want to see what he does after Matt Rule gets fired here in a couple weeks, because we all know it's going to happen. I don't think anybody likes calling for jobs, but it's going to happen. I mean, the Panthers are one of the worst teams in the NFL. They're one of the worst run teams in the NFL. Matt Rule seems like he's just hanging on for dear life there. I want to see what a healthy Baker Mayfield does after Matt Rule's gone. And then if it's still the same Baker we've seen the past couple weeks, then yes, I'm fully in the camp of it's over, man.
I think it's over. That's where I'm at with Baker Mayfield. I think he has one big time throw all of this year. I believe that's under 1% of his big throws. It's not like he doesn't have weapons. He has DJ Moore. He has Robbie Anderson. He has Christian McCaffrey on his side, but continually over and over again, he's not getting them the ball, or it's just not working. You saw, I'm sure many people have seen the DJ Moore comments at this point where they ask him about Baker Mayfield. And I mean, you really just have to look at his face to kind of tell how he's feeling. He's not saying he doesn't enjoy playing with Baker Mayfield or that he dislikes Baker Mayfield, but I think it's pretty clear from watching it. It's not working there in Carolina. And even if the Baker Mayfield, the talent, isn't completely done with, if he flames out of this situation, I'm not sure when he's getting another starting job, who's taking on his personality, who's taking on, I'm sure he wants a bigger contract than he's probably worth at this point. Like, it's a lot of the factors are adding up for, yeah, I mean, if you want to take a backup job somewhere, maybe we'll have you, but I don't know how many opportunities there are going to be to start. I think a lot of teams are going to learn some lessons this year from the Baker Mayfields, from the Carson Wentzes, from even the Matt Ryans of why are we going to go this route and take this washed up or potentially washed up quarterback and try to turn him around. It's just not working in a lot of those situations. And I think Baker Mayfield is a prime example of that. And I just don't know if he gets another chance. And by that alone, I think it's got to be over. And he's just not the players don't seem to like to play with him. And that's an issue if you're not going to be an talented.
Yeah, that's where, to me, it's the biggest thing with Baker, where it's like, and I saw the other day, he was like blaming the media or something like, oh, you guys are doing, it's like, oh yeah, Baker Mayfield's doing that thing again. The reason why teams throughout his career kept starting Ryan Fitzpatrick as their bridge quarterback or even Teddy Bridgewater is that everybody likes that guy. And if everybody likes that guy and you're a 500 quarterback, it's like, okay, great. We can bring in a rookie, put him behind that guy, or he can kind of get us through a year. Or maybe if we have a great defense, we can go somewhere. But when you're Baker Mayfield and you have the personality like that, and I can't wait for in a couple of weeks after either Matt Rule gets fired or whatever happens, maybe he gets benched for Sam Darnold or something, then the leaks come out oh, well, this is what's really going on behind the scenes in Carolina or something. It's like, oh, Baker's at it again, huh? I don't think he's a good guy to be around. I think he just kind of can't control himself from being Baker Mayfield. And that was a big red flag coming out that the Cleveland Browns just ignored and kind of got burned on it by Baker Mayfield. But the other part is that in similar fashion to some other quarterbacks like him, those mid-pack quarterbacks, he cannot make plays. He just can't make plays. Like you said, the big time throws and everything else. Like he has a good arm, and in structure, I think when he can throw to wide open people, he's fine, but he's not a playmaker at all. And in the league now, if you're not a playmaker and you're not a good dude, I mean, you're just the backup quarterback or you're playing somewhere else. Canada Baker Mayfield will be nice in a couple of years. Okay. In the thought of time here, I had some more, but let's just move on to our last one. How about Justin Fields? Paul, do you think Justin Fields, is it over, man?
I don't think it's over at this point. I think we like to rush young rookie quarterbacks. I think we've been spoiled in a lot of ways with the Justin Herberts and the Patrick Mahomeses and even Trevor Lawrence coming on in his second season. But I think it's important to remember that Fields jumped into this team last year when it's still a very volatile coaching situation there. He's tasked to go in there and play. And at that point, you're just looking for a few moments. And this year, you want to see and expect to see some strides. And I don't think he has quite met those. I don't necessarily think we've seen those strides. We've seen a couple nice plays that make you flash and say, okay, that's what we saw in college. That's why he was a potential, top 5 pick that dropped a little bit. I think he still probably doesn't move through his reads very well. He's getting sacked at an abnormally high rate, one that is showing through the advanced analytics might be more of his fault than the offensive line's fault. So he clearly has some issues. But I think our friend of at least the Purple Insider Pod, PFF Brad Spielberger, put out something yesterday about just the supporting casts that all quarterbacks have. And if you look at the graph, it's like, okay, everyone's kind of bunched together. Then there's one dot way over in the corner, and that's Justin Fields. He just doesn't, when it's Darnell Mooney and it's Velus Jones Jr. and it's Equiminius St. Brown, like those aren't really the starting caliber wide receivers you want. They're not running the ball, or they're not throwing the ball like ever. They're not giving him time in the dropbacks to develop. So I think at this point it's too early. It's definitely on a downward trajectory, but unlike Baker, like there aren't 4 or 5 years of this. It's a season, maybe a season and a half at this point of snaps that he's played. And I think he's the type of guy where you want to give him time. Will he get time with a new regime? I guess that's part of the question. But in terms of just overall, what can this guy be? I think it's way too early to say it's over at this point.
Yeah, I think it's too early to say it's over for him, but the signs are there. Their stats there pointing towards that it might be over, but also Chicago has just done nothing to help him out whatsoever. They're just, they stripped that team of talent completely over the past couple of years. So or over the last offseason mainly. So it's really hard to say it's over for him. But as you said, Paul, the signs are there. The stats are trending downwards. Slowest time to throw, highest pressures turned into sacks. It's not looking good for what he's able to do as a young quarterback.
I think it is. And look, it's hot routes. So if it's got to be hot. I think it's over. And the reason that I think that is Sam Darnold, because when you have to do multiple years of the excuse bus, it's usually not a good sign. And even if the guy is young, but he went to Ohio State, he didn't go to, Wyoming or something, because everyone's going to use the Josh Allen example. Like, well, Josh Allen, but Josh Allen was winning games and making plays in his second year. They went 10-6. They got to the playoffs. He was showing signs, and his running ability was so dynamic that he was closing the gap a little bit, to the point where even in the worst case scenario, if he had never figured out how to throw, he was going to win football games because he was such a dynamic runner and such an unstoppable beast of a runner, kind of like a Vince Young, only maybe a little more well-rounded of a human. I don't know. But in that way that like Vince Young won a lot of football games, getting big time runs and things like that and making a handful of throws. And I thought, okay, maybe that's what Josh Allen sort of becomes. But then, of course, he made these huge strides and improvement. So everyone's going to go with every bad quarterback. Whoa, look, Josh Allen did it. But Justin Fields is not doing that with his legs. He's not finding a way, and he isn't seeing anything. Like, it's very clear to me that he's just not seeing what they're drawing up for him. It's not just that these wide receivers are bad. I think that's a factor, and I think the offensive line being bad is a factor. But when you're holding on to the ball for a long time, but you're not scrambling, you're just standing there, and that's kind of what he did at Ohio State. Like, I think these issues are catastrophic for him. And like Sam Darnold, every once in a while, there's a play where you're like, whoa, look how talented the guy is. But this is a major, major issue when someone cannot just get the ball out. And, Joe Burrow, and I know he's become elite, so this is a little different. Joe Burrow had about the worst situation in the league when he came in as a rookie, and he battled and he found a way. I don't see the will in Justin Fields. Like, there are certain guys who have horrendous situations, and it's just like, grind it out, man. Throw pass after pass and just find a way and fight your way through it and dive for a first down or whatever. And maybe your team loses because they're tanking, but like, you're going to make something happen. There's not that will of Justin Fields. There are way too many games where I feel like that guy would rather be anywhere else than on an NFL field. And those things to me are just not really correctable. 50% completion percentage is so unacceptable in the NFL. I just don't know that you can pin everything. And also, when you get to a second coaching staff and it looks the same, it's like, okay, you can't just blame the bad man anymore. So I'm going to say that we are done there with Justin Fields. And it's just, and I think Chicago's in the perfect situation to just be like, well, we didn't draft him. On to the next guy. All right, next question. John Harbaugh went for a 4th and goal, tied at 20 with 4 minutes left against the Bills. Lamar Jackson threw a pick, and the Bills went down and won the game. However, I have not seen very much freak out. I've seen a handful of like, oh, I would have kicked the field goal or whatever, which if you kick the field goal, Josh Allen just goes and scores a touchdown against you. I think the explanation that John Harbaugh gave was perfect. I mean, look, the idea is if you score a touchdown there, there's an outcome where you can't lose the next time the Bills touch the ball. If you kick a field goal, there is an outcome where you can lose the game the next time the Bills touch the ball. And if you fail, you're not expecting an interception. So you're thinking that you're going to make them go 98 yards. So it all makes sense. And if they get to the middle of the field and kick a field goal, it's likely you're going to have time to get the ball back. So it all makes sense. But even 5 years ago, I think you would have had people losing their minds, calling for John Harbaugh's head. Have we reached the point, my friends, where people understand, fans, owners, media, that this is the way that coaches should be handling the games, and sometimes it's just not going to work out? Or do we still need work on this? I don't care who goes first.
I think there's been a general acceptance. I still saw some murmurs. I think James Jones was on Kevin Clark's podcast and was pretty adamant that they should have kicked the field goal, was not happy that they didn't. So it's small pockets here and there. And mostly I feel like it's been former players, which I think most of the analytics and media community feels pretty on the side of they should have gone for it. I still think it is important if there is player pushback, because that's the guys that are in the locker room with John Harbaugh. And like, if the players believe that they should have gone up, that they want to like trust the defense. Like, I think there are certain times when there's push and pull of what do the analytics say? How are your players going to react to those things? Those are things you always have to factor in. I think John Harbaugh at least has kind of the track record of doing this consistently, and it's worked out in some cases. It hasn't worked out in some cases, but people kind of understand the job with him. I think when a lot of people get upset is when it seemingly happens without no process. And I think that's what a lot of Lions fans were upset about with Dan Campbell when they lost in week 3 to the Vikings, because he was going for it on certain 4th downs, then he wasn't going for it. I think generally people can get behind a certain, way that coaches do things, but they have to be consistent from time to time. And so I think John Harbaugh has been steadfast in his reasoning of why he wants to go for it. He's been thoughtful. He's been very all of his logic has been very sound, at least by my ear, when he talks about these things. So I think there definitely is some general acceptance. And when you have Lamar Jackson and you're on the 2-yard line and you just need to get a couple yards and you have that guy, I think people generally get why that's going to happen, especially with Josh Allen on the other side of the ball. So I think there were certain factors in this game that made the outrage lessened a little bit just because of the situation that was happening on the field. So I think that certainly helps. I think I hesitate to say everyone's fully bought in, because I feel like next week there will be something just like this and it'll go the opposite direction. But I think for this week, it made a lot of sense why they did it. Now, will that continue? I'm not so sure.
Okay, let me change the question a little bit for Jonathan, because I think that we all feel the same way you feel, that like we're getting there. But did you like it, Jonathan? Like, do you like what John Harbaugh is doing, going for it as much as he is and leaning this far into it? Because he's actually kind of gotten burned a lot on it over the last 2 years. And I noticed that Brandon Staley is no longer the fourth down god, that he's really like dialed it back. And you do have to wonder, when you go like too far one way, if sometimes you have to dial it back, or do you want full throttle?
No, I want full throttle. I like this going for it in all situations, especially when you have the quarterback that John Harbaugh does at his disposal. When you have a guy like Lamar Jackson who can just do so much for you. He's come around as one of the better passers in the league. He has that elite running game that we know he has. And I like that thinking that you started off the question with of, yeah, you know that if you go for it and you get the touchdown, you at least have a chance of winning should your defense hold up. But if you give the ball back and you only get a field goal, then Josh Allen has a perfect chance of going downfield and striking late, which we know he's able to do with the offense that they have at their disposal in Buffalo. So yeah, I love the idea of just going full throttle with it on fourth down, especially in close situations. Absolutely. Just, I'm buying into it. I'm all for it. But going back to the original questions, yeah, I think we're getting there where there's full acceptance of it.
It's interesting because I think when you see people criticize a move like that, it sort of sounds like someone using batting average, where like there's some truth still in batting average. You can't hit 180 and still be a good MLB player. It's not possible. So if you're hitting 180, it's just like if you make a completely ludicrous fourth down decision and go for a 4th and 15 or something early in the game, everyone's going to know that that's wrong. But when it comes to the ones that are much closer, we have the numbers to look at it, to look at the WOBA or whatever, to get us a much clearer view of what's going on. What I noticed though a lot in the analytics is I'll see people say like, oh, they should have gone for it. And the difference in win percentage is like 2%. Like that to me is a coin flip, and the coach just has to, in that way, go with his gut based on what he's seeing. Unless it's a large difference, I'm going to kind of lean toward, well, I get why they decided to do that and not, criticize every coach where it was, oh, well, your win percentage is 43 versus 39. Like, okay, that is really close though. But I also think that there was a cottage industry of people who logged on Sunday to rip on coaches for making these mistakes. And now you just see fewer of them. Like Nate Hackett standing out like a sore thumb because he's the guy really screwing this up. But most coaches have kind of come around to understand this, and they've discovered that there are numbers that can guide them. And some coaches even have people in the press box who that's their job on game day. It's like, you are the clock management, timeout, field goal versus, go for it kind of guy. And that's what your job is. So it's an interesting advancement in the NFL. I don't think we've seen the league totally go in full throttle, as Jonathan said, but we're getting there to where it's hard to scrutinize too much because they actually have some process and not just like, oh, well, take the points. Okay, next question. Geno Smith, who we mentioned before, is 2-2 with the Seattle Seahawks, and he put up 48 points and is PFF's number 1 quarterback through 4 weeks. It is a small sample, but you can't help but love to see it. The guy didn't start a full season since 2014. He went 3-10 in that season as a starter. He currently has 108 quarterback rating. This could be the best story of 2022. I want you guys to give me your all-time favorite quarterback redemption story. Why don't you start, Jonathan?
I think I'm going to take a more recent one in Kurt Warner. He had the great start to his career, obviously leading the greatest show on turf to a Super Bowl early on, had the 2 MVP seasons early on, or at least the 1 MVP season early on. But then in the middle of his career, he had like a 5-year stretch where he went 13-29 between the St. Louis Rams, New York Giants, and then his early part of his Arizona Cardinals career. But his last 2 years in Arizona, he led a 9-7 team and a 10-5 team. And that really kickstarted probably the best era that we've seen of Cardinals football, because they went and got Carson Palmer after that and continued his stretch. But he almost led them to their first Super Bowl win. He got them to their first ever Super Bowl. And he was probably one of the greatest toe drags in NFL history away from winning that Super Bowl as the Arizona Cardinals quarterback after 5 years of what looked like miserable end of the career Kurt Warner football. And he just sparked it up, lit it up, threw for 4,500 yards one season, 3,700 yards the next season, and brought them to within inches of a Super Bowl win.
What's your favorite, Paul?
Yeah, I feel very out of my depth in this question with the two of you. Very deep football historians, and me, the very young person that doesn't quite have the knowledge to back this up. So I think one you mentioned actually there that has had a decent, kind of had a decent lull and then come back in his career was Carson Palmer, and just what he went through, starting out so promising in Cincinnati, then having a couple dark years in Oakland before coming back to Arizona and playing well. They just never had the postseason accolades to really like complete that story. And then one that didn't come with a ton of success, but it's showing my hometown roots here is just the progress and kind of the response that Teddy Bridgewater has had since he went down with his injury in 2017, where, you know, there's questions about is he still going to have the leg? And then he's playing and he's carved out a nice role of kind of fringe starter to really high end backup. I think just his kind of perseverance and his ability to get through everything that he's been able to get through. And to, at this point, me not feel like every time I watch him, like his leg, like something's bad's going to happen. I think he's really come a long way. And I've been happy to see him kind of continue to get opportunities, even though some other mediocre quarterbacks have continued to get starting opportunities that he hasn't really gotten. I'm sure what he's been able to show, I think he's probably deserved one of those that he necessarily hasn't gotten. But just to see kind of his rise and fall, and we watched that one so closely in Minnesota, and then he gets kind of the Cinderella moment back with Minnesota back on the field. And now for him to kind of build off that, a great run with the Saints, and now stepping into a situation where he might be the starter with the Dolphins for a while Tua recovers. I'll be really interested to see how he plays and how he continues to kind of progress. So that's my very recent one in history that I could pull out.
Well, in the same category, Alex Smith as well, that his career looked like it should be over. His leg looks mutilated, but yet he came back. And look, the guy was not the same, but he still found ways to win some games, which is really remarkable considering that he could not move at that point. And it looked like for sure his career was going to be ended with that leg injury. So similar to Teddy, his comeback was pretty unbelievable. I'll go deep into the books a little bit here. Doug Williams might be my favorite redemption story of all time. Started out his career in Tampa Bay, was a great quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, took them to places they had never been before. They refused to pay him, and he ended up going to the USFL, came back to the NFL, and ends up becoming the first black quarterback to win the Super Bowl with Washington in a game where he got hurt early and then came back in and played unbelievable football for Washington. And his legacy is that game and that redemption story. That's one of the all-time greats. One of my favorites is Vinny Testaverde, Tampa Bay being involved here as well. Vinny Testaverde had a season, his second year in the NFL, where he threw 13 touchdowns and 35 interceptions. That is not a typo.
You'd be unplayable these days if you did that.
He had a quarterback rating of 48. Like when you put it on all Madden and you haven't played the game yet, and you just go right to the hardest level, that's the season you have. You just throw interceptions all the time. And yet this man battled through, had a good season in Cleveland at one point, and ended up winning 12 games for the New York Jets in 1998, and then 10 games for the Jets in 2001, and turned around his career. He still threw a bunch of picks most of the time, but Vinny Testaverde in his late age, how old was he? He must have been like 38 when he was coming back and actually making himself into a solid NFL quarterback for teams that were great and coached by Bill Parcells and had Curtis Martin. So I'm sure that the supporting cast was helpful there. But Vinny Testaverde going from one of the biggest busts to a quarterback that was winning games over multiple seasons for the New York Jets was just really fun. I mean, that's just a really classic NFL redemption story. Last question for you guys. After a Marcus Mariota interception, Arthur Smith, coach of the Falcons, ran the ball 14 straight times in their win over the Browns. Great reason to not buy into the Browns, by the way, that they lost the game where the other team just stopped passing.
Yes.
What's the most passive aggressive thing you think a football coach can ever do, Paul?
Well, if this one's off the field, so I'm not sure this counts necessarily.
It counts. Yeah, anything.
Okay, we have experience with this with Mike Zimmer, but just some passive aggressiveness in media press conferences, just to your players, to other reporters. Obviously, infamously, what Mike Zimmer said about Kellen Mond, we don't need to see him. We see him every day in practice. That one might just be a little bit more aggressive than it is passive. And then after that Packers game, one of the Vikings beat reporters from the Pioneer Press, Chris Thomason, asked him kind of if he's disappointed about missing the playoffs for a second season. And Zimmer just turned it right around and said, well, are you disappointed, or what do you think, or something like that? So just there can be some snark and passive aggressiveness that comes out in these media press conferences that I think can be really great. And then just on the field, I love petty use of timeouts by coaches. This happens. I remember this distinctly in college where Kirk Ferentz in a game against PJ Fleck, they're up big and Kirk Ferentz is just calling timeouts down the stretch, even though the team's up by a ton of points. And he's just kind of messing with Fleck because he doesn't like Fleck. And so I think just anytime we can get some like weird, but like the head coaches beefing back and forth somehow during a game, and really all they can do is use their timeouts to be really petty in stopping the clock when they just shouldn't be or don't need to be. So I think those are two of my favorites of what coaches can do.
I was going to comment with the telling your historically not risk-takery quarterback to take some risks in one press conference, then a couple weeks later saying, yeah, that's probably not a great idea. Never mind on that. That would probably be up there. Other than that, rotating quarterbacks because you don't have one that you actually like and just going with two sucky quarterbacks and saying, we're going to try and figure this out. I think that's got to be up there because you're just not willing to buy into either of them, even though it probably might be better for your team. That's probably up there for passive aggressive because you're not just willing to come out and say it that you have two sucky quarterbacks.
I liked what Pittsburgh did and said, we needed a spark, which is a passive aggressive way of saying, good God, you are so bad. What is your problem? Why are you ruining this season for me? We put in Kenny Pickett because we needed a spark. Okay. Handshakes are another part of this.
Yes.
You give the either the very aggressive, like go in for the kill handshake, or the just like the dead fish, just like whatever, touch my hand so I can leave. Those are good ones for sure. Definitely at the podium, like there is a lot of the passive aggressiveness. The other one I thought of too would be if you really don't like your kicker, just go for it on fourth down or go for two. If your kicker has missed a couple field goals, you're just like, no, we're just going for two. There's no reason to go for two, but bleep this guy. But if you're Urban Meyer, you just kick your kicker if you don't want to. Now, see, that's where you got to be
aggressive, not passive.
Not aggressive. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, there's probably dozens more that coaches do, maybe in film sessions and things like that we don't even know about, that has to be very skilled in the art of passive aggressiveness. So Paul Hodowanic, Jonathan Harrison, appreciate you guys' time. We do this once a week, Hot Routes. It's always fun where we go through 5 questions. So if you're listening to us for the first time, comes out every Tuesday or Wednesday, and we'll keep doing it. And if you're a Vikings fan discovering this, Purple Insider is the pod for you. So thanks for all your help, guys, and good times. We'll talk again soon.